On March 12, 2003, a 51-year-old farmer named Robert Kendall stood in the doorway of a machine shed he'd just inherited and stared at something that didn't make sense. Under two blue tarps, covered in dust thick enough to write in, sat a Case IH 7140 Magnum. The tires still held air. The paint still carried its factory shine beneath the grime. When he climbed into the cab and checked the hour meter, it read 890 hours. The tractor was 9 years old and practically new. He'd paid $340,000 for the entire estate, 280 acres, a house that needed a roof, 2 grain bins, and whatever equipment came with it. He expected junk. He found a machine worth $40,000 sitting in the dark like a secret. Robert didn't know why it was there, but he knew that tractors don't hide themselves. If you've spent years watching farming decisions unfold slowly, if you understand that equipment choices carry consequences long after the invoice is paid, then this channel exists for you. These stories move at the speed of real life. No hype, no shortcuts, just the weight of what happens when metal, debt, and memory intersect on ground that doesn't forgive mistakes. If that matters to you, subscribe. These stories deserve to be remembered the way they actually happened. Robert Kendall farmed 640 acres in central Illinois. Corn and soybeans, rented ground and owned ground. He ran a Case IH 7120 he'd bought used in 1996, and it did what he needed it to do. He wasn't expanding. He wasn't chasing yield records. He was 51 years old and trying to make it to 65 without selling anything off. The estate sale came up in February. The neighbor's farm, a man named Edgar Tillman, who died alone at 73. No children, no close family. The land went to auction, and Robert went because land that touched his was worth showing up for, even if he couldn't afford it. He didn't plan to bid on the equipment, but when the auctioneer mentioned the machine shed came with whatever was inside, and no one else seemed interested in a property that needed so much work, Robert raised his hand twice and won the entire package for less than the land alone should have cost. He took possession 2 weeks later. The house smelled like propane and old carpet. The grain bins were rusted through at the base, but the machine shed was tight. Roof solid, doors square, concrete floor clean under years of dust. And in the back corner, under tarps that hadn't moved in nearly a decade, was the Case IH 7140 Magnum. Robert pulled the tarps off slowly. The tractor looked like it had rolled off the showroom floor and been immediately covered. No mud on the fenders, no wear on the steps. The front weights still had their paint. The cab glass was clean. He checked the fuel, still topped off, though stale. He checked the oil, full and amber. He popped the hood and inspected the engine. Everything looked factory correct. No leaks, no patches, no evidence of hard use. 890 hours. Most farmers put that many hours on a tractor in a single season. This one had been driven less than 100 hours a year, and then it had been stopped. Robert didn't start it that day. He closed the shed and went home. He returned the next morning with his son, Michael, who was 26 and worked ground with him part-time while running a diesel repair business in town. Michael stood in the shed and stared at the tractor the same way Robert had. "That's a 94, Michael said. "Fully loaded. That's the 12-speed power shift, cab suspension, front wheel assist. This was a $50,000 machine when it was new." 890 hours, Robert said. Michael walked around it twice. He opened the cab door and looked inside. The seat was pristine. The floor mat still had the factory texture. Even the radio preset buttons hadn't been touched. "Something's wrong with it," Michael said. "Has to be. Nobody parks a tractor like this unless it's got a problem they couldn't fix." "I thought that too," Robert said, "but I can't find anything." "Did you try to start it?" "Not yet." Michael grabbed a jerry can of fresh diesel from the truck, drained the old fuel, and added 5 gallons of clean. He pulled the battery, took it to town, charged it, and brought it back. He reconnected it, checked the glow plugs, and turned the key. The Case IH 740 Magnum started on the first crank. It idled smooth and cold like it had been running the day before. No smoke, no knocking, no hesitation. Michael throttled it up. The turbo spooled. The exhaust stayed clean. The hydraulics responded. He cycled through all 12 gears. Everything worked. He shut it down and looked at his father. "Dad, this tractor's perfect." Robert nodded. I know. So why was it hidden? Robert didn't answer. Because he didn't know. He registered the tractor with the county and took the title to the Case IH dealer in Bloomington to transfer the serial number into his name. The parts manager, a man named Tom Hartley, who'd worked the counter for 30 years, pulled up the record and went quiet. You bought the Tillman place, Tom said. I did. Tom scrolled through the service file on his screen. This tractor was ordered in March of 1994. Edgar Tillman spec'd it himself, took delivery in June. He drove it exactly twice, once to bring it home and once to disc a field. Then he brought it back here in September and asked us to change the oil and grease it even though it didn't need it. He paid cash for the service and said he'd be back in the spring. Did he come back? No. We called him in April of 95. No answer. We called again in 96. Same thing. Eventually we stopped calling. Tom leaned back in his chair. Edgar bought that tractor 3 months after his wife died. Robert went still. She had cancer, Tom continued. Diane, 46 years old. They'd been married 28 years. No kids. She was the only family he had. The tractor came in right after the funeral. Edgar told me he ordered it because she'd wanted him to modernize. She'd been on him for years to trade up from that old 2394 he was running. He finally did it, but by the time it arrived, she was gone. Tom clicked the screen off. He couldn't sell it, and I don't think he could stand to look at it. Robert stood in the dealership for a long time without saying anything. Finally, he asked, "Did he ever come back here? After that service visit?" "Once," Tom said. "In 1999, he bought parts for the 2394. I asked him about the 7140, and he said it was fine. That's the last time I saw him." Robert thanked him and left. He didn't tell anyone the story. Not his son, not his wife, not the neighbors who asked about the tractor when they saw him pulling it out of the shed to clean it up. He just said he'd gotten it in the estate sale, that it had low hours, and that he planned to use it. And that spring, he did. He started it on a cold morning in April and let it warm up for 20 minutes. Then he hooked it to a chisel plow and took it to a 40-acre field he'd been working with the 7120. The Case IH 7140 pulled smoother, responded quicker, and drank less fuel doing the same work. It felt like cheating, but it also felt like something else, like he was using a machine that had been meant for someone who never got to see it work. Like he was finishing a conversation that had been interrupted. He ran the tractor carefully. He checked the fluids every morning. He greased it after every use. He brought it back to the shed every night and parked it in the same spot where he'd found it, as if some part of him believed Edgar Tillman might come looking for it. By the end of the first season, the hour meter read 1,390 hours, 500 hours in 6 months. More than the tractor had run in its first 9 years combined. It didn't break. Not once. Robert ran the Case IH 7140 through 2004, 2005, and 2006. He used it for primary tillage, for planting with a 12-row planter, and for pulling a grain cart during harvest. He kept the 7120 for lighter work, but the 7140 became his main machine. He took it to the dealer once a year for service, and every time, Tom Hartley pulled up the file and looked at the hours. "You're putting time on it," Tom said in 2006. "I am. It's good to see it working." Robert nodded. He didn't elaborate. In 2007, commodity prices started to climb. Corn hit $4 a bushel, and for the first time in years, Robert's operation ran in the black with room to breathe. He thought about trading up, maybe a newer Magnum, maybe more horsepower, but every time he considered it, he looked at the 7140 and couldn't justify it. The machine worked. It didn't owe him anything, and part of him felt like it wasn't his to trade, so he kept it. In 2008, fuel prices spiked. Diesel hit $4 a gallon, and margins that had looked comfortable a year earlier disappeared. Robert's neighbors started talking about cutting back, about idling equipment, about whether the boom was already over. Robert kept farming. The Case IH 7140 ran the same hours it always had. He didn't push it harder. He didn't ask it to do more. He just let it work the way it had been designed to work, and it carried him through the year without trouble. By the end of 2008, the hour meter read 3,100 hours. Michael, who by then was 32 and running his own business full-time, came out to help with fall tillage and asked his father when he planned to upgrade. "I don't," Robert said. "Dad, you could trade it now and get good value. That tractor's still worth $30,000. You put another 5 years on it, and it won't be worth half that." "I'm not trading it. Why not?" Robert didn't answer right away. They were standing in the shop, and the Case IH 7140 was parked in the same spot it had been parked for 5 years, clean and ready for the next day. Finally, Robert said, "Because it's not mine to trade." Michael frowned. "What do you mean? You bought it." "I bought the estate. The tractor came with it, but it wasn't Edgar's to sell either. Not really." Michael waited. "It was hers," Robert said. "She wanted him to have it, and he couldn't let it go because letting it go meant accepting she was gone, so he buried it, and I pulled it out, but I'm not the one who gets to decide when it's done." Michael looked at the tractor and then at his father. "So when does it get to be done?" "When it quits," Robert said, "or when I do." The years moved forward the way they always do on a farm, slow, then fast, then slow again. Robert turned 55 in 2007, 60 in 2012. 65 in 2017. He didn't retire. The Case IH 7140 Magnum kept running. He replaced the injectors in 2010. He replaced the clutch packs in the transmission in 2013. He put new rear tires on it in 2015. Everything else was maintenance: filters, oil, grease, and time. By 2017, the hour meter read 6,200 hours. Some of his neighbors had traded tractors 3 times in the same period. Bigger machines, newer technology, GPS guidance and variable rate controls. Robert stayed with the 7140. It didn't have the screens, it didn't have the automation, but it had something else. It had weight, not the physical kind, though it had that too, 18,000 pounds of it, but the other kind. The kind that comes from knowing a machine has already survived loss, and that using it means continuing something that was supposed to end. Robert never said that out loud, but he felt it every time he climbed into the cab. In 2018, Michael took over more of the farming operation. Robert still drove, but his back couldn't handle the long days anymore, and Michael had sold his repair business to focus on the ground full-time. They were running 740 acres by then. The original 640 plus 100-acre parcel they'd picked up in 2015. Michael wanted to add a second large tractor. He wanted to trade the old 7120 and buy something with more horsepower, something that could pull a 16-row planter and keep up with the Case IH 7140. Robert agreed. But when Michael suggested trading the 7140 as part of the deal, Robert refused. "We're not trading it," Robert said. "Dad, it's 24 years old. It's worth maybe $15,000 at this point. We could roll that into a down payment and we're not trading it." Michael stopped pushing. He'd learned over the years that there were decisions his father made that didn't require explanation. This was one of them. So they kept the 7140 and bought a used Case IH Magnum 305 to run alongside it. Michael ran the newer machine, and Robert stayed with the 7140. It kept working. In the spring of 2019, Tom Hartley retired from the Case IH dealership. Robert went to his retirement party, and they stood together near the parts counter where they'd talked 100 times over the years. "You still running that 7140? Tom asked. "I am." "How many hours now?" "Just past 7,000. Tom smiled. "Edgar would have liked that." Robert nodded. "I think so too." Tom paused, then said, "I never told you this, but Diane used to come in here with him, back in the 80s and early 90s. She'd sit in the waiting area while he bought parts, and she'd flip through the brochures. She loved the big Magnums. She'd show him the pictures and tell him he needed to stop being stubborn and buy one." "He finally did," Robert said. "He did, 3 months too late." They stood there in silence for a moment. Then Tom said, "You gave that tractor the life it was supposed to have. That matters." Robert didn't respond. He shook Tom's hand and left. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and commodity prices crashed before rebounding wildly. Supply chains broke, dealer inventory dried up, used equipment values climbed to levels that didn't make sense. Michael checked the market value of the Case IH 7140, and found listings for similar machines selling for $25,000, nearly double what they'd been worth 2 years earlier. He brought it up to Robert over dinner. "Dad, I know you don't want to hear this, but we could sell the 7140 right now and get enough to cover half the cost of a newer used machine. The market's insane. That tractor's worth more now than it's been in a decade." Robert set his fork down. "We're not selling it. I know you have a thing about this tractor, but it's not a thing, Michael. It's a responsibility." Michael went quiet. Robert continued. "Edgar Tillman bought that machine because his wife wanted him to have it. And when she died, he couldn't let it go. Not because he was stubborn, because it was the last thing she asked him for. And he failed her. He let it sit in the dark for 9 years because he couldn't do what she wanted, and he couldn't forgive himself for it." Robert looked at his son. "I didn't know that when I found it, but I know it now. And I'm not going to finish what he started just to turn around and sell it for profit. That machine gets to work until it's done working. And when it's done, it stays here." Michael didn't bring it up again. By 2021, Robert was 69 years old. His knees hurt every morning, and his hands ached when he gripped the steering wheel. He still drove the Case IH 7140, but Michael handled most of the long days. The tractor had 8,400 hours on it. It had pulled 27 planting seasons, 27 tillage seasons, and countless acres of work that never made it into any record book. It had outlasted the man who ordered it and the woman who wanted it, and it kept running. One afternoon in October, after a long day of fall tillage, Robert parked the tractor in the machine shed and sat in the cab for a while before shutting it down. The sun was setting outside, and the light came through the dusty windows in long, soft angles. He thought about Edgar Tillman. He thought about Diane, who he'd never met, but who had somehow shaped the last 18 years of his life. He thought about the day he'd pulled the tarps off and found a machine that didn't make sense, and how much sense it made now. The tractor idled quietly beneath him, steady, unshaken, waiting for the next day. Robert shut it down, climbed out, and closed the shed door behind him. In the winter of 2022, Michael sat down with his father and asked him what he wanted to do with the farm long term. Robert was 70. Michael was 45. They both knew the conversation was coming. "I want you to keep it," Robert said. "All of it. The ground, the equipment, the debt, what little there is. I want you to keep farming." "What about the 7140? Michael asked. Robert looked at him. "You keep that too." "For how long?" "As long as it runs," Michael nodded slowly. "And when it doesn't? Then you park it in the shed where I found it, and you leave it there." "Why?" Robert thought about that for a long time. Finally, he said, "Because some machines aren't just machines. They're promises that didn't get kept the first time, and somebody has to finish them." In the spring of 2023, Robert drove the Case IH 7140 Magnum for the last time. He ran it through a field of corn stubble, pulling a disc, and the machine worked the way it always had, smooth, strong, and steady. When he finished, he parked it in the shed, checked the fluids, and wiped down the hood. The hour meter read 8,890 hours. He stood there for a while, one hand on the fender, and then he walked out and let Michael take over. Michael ran the tractor through the 2023 season and into 2024. It pulled a planter in the spring. It pulled a grain cart in the fall. It did the work it had always done, and it did it without complaint. By the end of 2024, the hour meter read 9,200 hours. On a cold morning in February 2025, Michael started the Case IH 7140 to move it from the shed to the shop for an oil change. The engine turned over, caught, and then stalled. He tried again. Same thing. He checked the fuel, he checked the filters, he checked everything he could think of. The tractor wouldn't stay running. He called a diesel mechanic from town, someone he trusted, someone who'd worked on the machine before. The mechanic spent 2 hours diagnosing it and finally found the problem. The injection pump was failing. Not catastrophically, just slowly. It could be rebuilt, it could be replaced, but it would cost $4,500 in parts and labor. Michael stood in the shop and looked at the tractor. It was 31 years old. It had 9,200 hours on it. It didn't owe him anything. He thought about his father's words. as long as it runs. He called the mechanic back and told him to order the parts. 3 weeks later, the Case IH 7140 Magnum was running again. Michael test drove it around the farm, and it pulled as strong as it ever had. He brought it back to the shed, parked it in its spot, and shut it down. He didn't know how many more years it had. Maybe 5, maybe 10. Maybe it would outlast him the way it had outlasted Edgar Tillman and the way it was outlasting his father. But he knew one thing. It wasn't his decision when it stopped. It was the tractor's. Robert Kendall turned 73 in March 2026. He doesn't farm anymore, but he still walks out to the shed most mornings to check on things. The Case IH 7140 sits in the same spot where he found it 23 years ago, clean and ready, waiting for the next day. He doesn't talk about it much. People in town know he runs an old Magnum, and some of them remember Edgar Tillman, but no one knows the full story. No one knows why Robert kept it when it made more sense to trade. No one knows why Michael fixed it when it made more sense to let it go. And Robert doesn't explain. Because some decisions aren't about money or logic or efficiency. They're about honoring something that was interrupted. They're about finishing what someone else started, even if you never met them. They're about understanding that machinery carries more than horsepower. It carries memory and loss and love that didn't get the chance to see itself through. The Case IH 7140 Magnum runs 9,200 hours now. It's pulled thousands of acres. It's survived 3 owners, one who couldn't use it, one who wouldn't trade it, and one who will keep it running as long as it asks to be kept. It started as a promise that Edgar Tillman made to his wife and couldn't keep. It became a machine that Robert Kendall inherited and couldn't abandon. And now it's a tractor that Michael Kendall will farm until it decides it's finished. Not because it makes sense, because it's the right thing to do.